Once I went for a campfire with my friends. My friends and I were so excited. When we all three reached the campfire point, it was too dark. We cooked horror stories, sang songs, and soon went to sleep. After some time, I woke up because of a sound like an animal is eating something. I was scared and started shivering. There I decided to call my friends. One of them said, "Why are you so scared? Oh, you are sweating." I replied, "I hear a sound like someone is eating something." Another said, "Don't worry, we will go and check what is happening." They both went to check what happened, but they did come back. Now my level of scaredness was raised. Then I came out of the tent. I started walking in search of my friends in the surrounding areas. After a while, I saw a horrifying scene and I was frozen. The heads of my friends were chopped off and hung on the branch of a tree. And then a small animal came out, which I assumed would be a furry, cute animal, but I was wrong. He was slowly appearing to be big and become a very horrible monster. I ran to my car and escaped so that I was safe, but then the same monster jumped over my car's front glass, and this incident is frozen in my mind. Bought a new house in the small town of Winthrop. The house was cheap, but the most important part was that I needed to get away from the city. A few months ago, I had a run-in with a stalker. While I had managed to get him arrested, I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes just constantly watching me. I felt like there were eyes everywhere, at home and on the street, so I decided to move out into the country to somewhere with less people, just for peace of mind. The house itself was big and somewhat old, but otherwise very welcoming. The agent who introduced me to the house had been required to mention that a serial killer had lived here in the past, which was why the house was so cheap. However, he, and later my next-door neighbor Sarah, both told me to pay the thought no mind. 4 other owners had lived in the house since then, and all of them were very happy with it. I loved the house. Its interior furnishings were beautiful and very comfortable. The people of Winthrop were friendly, often bringing over freshly baked pastries or inviting me over for dinner. Get-togethers, they said, were the key to making sure everyone who lived in Winthrop loved it there. Yet after a week, I stopped loving it. The feeling of someone watching returned, worse than before. I tried to ignore it, but soon I started losing sleep. Giant bags grew under my eyes, and I began yawning almost as much as I breathed. Sarah was kind enough to let me stay in her house for a few nights. It was during this time that I heard the legend of Forrest Carter, the serial killer who had lived in my house. While no one knows his exact kill count, Carter, also known as the Winthrop Peacock, was a man with extremely severe case of narcissism. Legends say that he couldn't fall asleep if he didn't feel like he was being watched. He was finally arrested for putting up a scarecrow to watch him during the night. Only, it wasn't a scarecrow. Carter had murdered a 17-year-old girl just so her corpse could stare at him. The story gave me shivers, and after I went home, I felt like there were hundreds of pairs of eyes just watching me, no matter how I turned. Today, however, was the first day that I acted out. I was cooking breakfast when I felt the eyes. Instinctively, out of fear, I threw my kitchen knife, which lodged itself into the wall. As I pulled it out, I found myself staring at a pair of eyes. Dirtiness and milky eyelid sacs, pickling in formaldehyde. I've been watching the police peel away the drywall of my house for hours now. So far, they've found 142 pairs of eyes in little glass jars. The scariest thing is, each and every one was staring at me. Novak paused. I have seen a lot of dreams. Some are exciting, or some are horrendous. Most of us have a lot of nightmares. But just think how terrifying it would be if it became true. I am telling you this because I have been through this. I even remember the nightmare I had like 7 years ago. I don't know how, but I randomly get dreams I never thought of. I usually dream about ghosts and all, but this time it was different and kind of a vision. as most of it became true. This dream was about a lady wearing a weird dark textured scarf, having something written on them. It was a blur and congested, but there was something written on. End quote. She was following me, and I can see her. But whenever I turned back, she vanished. It felt like she was around me, but invisible to my eyes. I can see her reflection in the mirror, but can't see her in reality. I started sweating, frightened as I didn't know what was happening. Suddenly, there was a glitch in the lights, and when it became normal, everyone had disappeared. I was freaking out, and I don't know, but something touched from my shoulder, and I woke up. Then, the pains tore through me, frightening me. My everyone had disappeared. I was freaking out, and I don't know how, but something touched my shoulder, and I woke up. Just a week after I saw that dream, a lady was a victim of that vision. Whatever I saw in my dream, mostly everything happened with her, and she went to a coma. A teenage girl named Rosemary attended a high school in a small city in Canada. One day, her biology teacher announced that he was taking the entire class on a school trip. Everyone was delighted. The next day, a bus brought all of the students to a remote part of the countryside. The purpose of the trip was, of course, educational. The teacher told them they were going to explore a nature trail. As they walked along the trail, Rosemary was enjoying the fresh air and the time off from school. She was chatting happily to her best friend, Amanda. The two girls were caught up in conversation and started lagging behind. Somewhere along the way, they took a wrong turn and became separated from the rest of the group. The girls kept walking, hoping that they would eventually meet up with the rest of the class, but they just became more lost. Kirsten said that she thought once or twice that she might slip away into the thickets at night, as long as she could hide in the sea mire. Eventually, they came to a small pathway and were relieved when they saw that it led to a little cottage set back amongst the trees. The walls were covered with ivy, and the garden was overgrown. The doors and windows looked as if they hadn't been painted in decades. When they knocked on the door, a little old lady came out to greet them. She was very frail and stooped with age. They asked her if they could use her phone. The old woman invited them inside and offered them a cup of tea. The two girls were tired and accepted her offer without hesitation. Inside, the cottage was dirty and grimy. The floor was muddy, and the fireplace was covered in soot. The old woman told them to sit down, and for some reason, as she hurried out to the kitchen, she said, "Keep your eyes shut." The girls wondered what she meant by that last comment. Curious, they looked around the room and their eyes settled on a large mirror that was standing in the corner. Somehow they couldn't say advertisement. Them to take their eyes off the mirror and sat there, quietly staring at their own reflections. In the mirror, their faces appeared strange and distorted. It looked as if their cheeks were covered with scratches, and they sung aloud when they couldn't speak. They couldn't seem to tear their eyes away from the unsettling image. As they watched in horror, their faces began to change rapidly. More scratches appeared, followed by large bruises and bleeding wounds. The two girls had a very bad feeling about this. The deaths transcended. Just then, Amanda turned her head and Rosemary saw something that terrified her. In the reflection, she saw that Amanda had a sharp knife sticking out of her eye, and her own face looked as if it had been crushed. They covered their eyes with their hands and started shaking and screaming. The old woman came hobbling back into the room, and when she looked at the two girls, she growled, "I told you to keep your eyes closed." Without another word, Rosemary and Amanda jumped to their feet and ran out of the house. They kept running, crashing through bushes and jumping over streams, not knowing where they were going. Eventually, they saw the school bus in the distance and breathed a sigh of relief. Their classmates were surprised to see the two girls come running across the fields. The teacher got angry with them and told the girls they had kept everybody waiting for over an hour. Rosemary and Amanda were just glad to be back with their classmates again. The school trip was over, so all of the students climbed on board and the bus drove off. By the next day, the two girls had almost forgotten about their scary incident with the old woman in the little cottage. However, exactly 1 week later, Rosemary and Amanda were found dead in their beds. Their sheets were stained with blood, and their bodies were covered in scratches, bruises, and deep wounds. It was the last flight, and having reached the terminal, I looked up at the dark, gloomy sky. Distant sounds of thunder and slanting rain made me rush inside. There was hardly any passengers, except for the usual few sleeping on the chairs. Destination unknown, and the people mopping the floor. I saw two staffs, both girls, and asked in an apprehensive tone, "When is the flight scheduled?" "The flight is canceled, sir. I am extremely sorry, due to the inclement weather, but you shall get the morning one." And I looked at them. I had come for work, knew no one in town, and had checked out. Damn it, I had to stay at the terminal, I mauled. I put my luggage and looked outside. It was still raining, but not so hard. Just then, my cell rang. "Are you on the flight, and when are we supposed to pick you up?" It was my little one shouting, and I could not help smiling. "The pilot has got scared and ran off, so tomorrow I shall be there, and yes, I have got something for you." There was a silence, but the promise of a gift calmed her. "Fine. Shall call tomorrow." I looked up, and though one of the girls' staff was doing something, the other gave me a very charming smile. Just by instinct, and also, since I had nothing to do, I asked, "Care to take a walk, if you feel up to it?" She just smiled and led me through the doors. I found the immediate impulse of her a bit odd, but the cool wind and the empty tarmac soothed me. Advertisement. Greater than we were walking by the side of the runway. Seeing the depression in the ground, at the end I asked her, for she was quiet and felt as if secure in presence, "Is this where the wheels hit the ground?" "Yes, it's a short strip, hence the pilots have a hard time." It was the first time I heard her voice, but she sounded so familiar. "BTW, what's your name?" asked Peter. With a very vivacious smile, she said, "Sanskriti." "Sanskritis. We park our cars this way only." Then, after a pause, she looked at me and said, "A girl got crushed under the wheels of a jet. Her body was scarred beyond recognition." I nodded, since such occurrences happens. "When was this?" 4 years ago, on a night like this. We had walked back to the terminal, and turning around, noticing she was leaving, maybe her shift being over, said, "Oh, the driver." "Gina." "Thank you, Sanskriti. It was a pleasure meeting you." The other girl looked up in a weird way and whispered, "April," murmured the one. Sarah Sanskriti passed away 4 years back, and she always comes on nights like this. I just stared, but a strange melancholy, a nostalgia engulfed me. Had I known her before, in the fog of times gone? Silence. "I am not evil, just a soul who is wandering, and you, I have known for centuries. Do remember me with love." And she walked away. Tears welled in my eyes, and I thought to myself, someday I shall meet her again, in the same stormy weather and empty terminal. All those who wander, are not lost. On a night, one young man was walking on the desolate road to go to another village. Hearing a shout from behind, his feet stopped. "My child, listen. Just go ahead carefully." When the young man turning, he saw an old man. In confusion, young man asked, "But why?" The old man replied, "You don't know. Years ago on this road, some youths murdered one trade passer named Jivan Lal." Hearing this, the young man asked in surprise, "Killed a trade passer? But why?" "I thought," the old man said, "for robbery. They buried his dead body under that tree. The leaves of the tree shake from the breeze." On hearing the old man, the young man thankfully said, "Oh, thank you for alerting me to the robbers." The old man said, "Not from the robbers." The young man asked with surprise, "So?" "The leaves shake up again." And the old man said very slowly, "From the soul of Jivan Lal." "And soul?" the young man shouted. "What's rubbish shout? Who is this?" The old man explained to the young man. "Yes, Jivan Lal's soul is stopped youngster passing through this road," and then told his incident to that youngster. "The leaves are shaking." The young man thought something and then asked, "No one talks about this in the village." The old man said, "Hey, they don't know anything about this, so why are they talking about this?" The young man hesitantly asked, "So?" The old man said, after talking about his incident, Jivan Lal's soul kills the trade passer and then buries his dead body under that tree. "The leaves shake up again?" she asks. "But why?" asked the young man. The old man said with little anger, "Because he assumes every young man as his murderer." Just a few seconds. The young man asks with great surprise, "Wait a minute. Then how do you know about all this?" I nod, seeing a bitter smile on the old man's face. Now the young man's legs were shaking up. Year 392, day 64, and what she guessed was the hour 12. The MPs had returned and left Nighthawk's graveside with the monument, and Solace the musician was restored. Oh, what she wouldn't give to feel the cool moon-filled breeze on her face again, to feel the shivers of a cold lake in the middle of the night while pulling at the moss from her toes. Yet, if she could go back in time, there was nothing about that day she wanted to change. That day. She had not thought about that day in a lifetime. That one single act that had led to this. Shackles around her feet and wrists, bruises that never quite healed, the constant sound of dripping, and the centuries-old bread that she never could quite reach. She threw her head back and looked up at the ceiling. The blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb. She immediately looked away from it. It was those lines that always got her trouble. Her mind drifted back to the day again. She was being led towards the town square, being pushed by the viewers for her trial. Different names were being muttered around her. Traitor, liar, blood the traitor, unworthy. She ignored them all and marched forward with her head held high. At one corner, her family was standing. Her mother and father looked at her with sneers on their faces, and if she didn't know better, she would have thought she saw sorrow on her sister's face. Directly in front of her, she looked into the unforgiving eyes of the king. The woman by the side started reading from a scroll. "Do you deny the crimes done by you?" "Depends on the crimes," she said, pulling her lips into a smirk. "Betraying your own blood for the blood of another." Nick demanded. "I'll not deny, nor do I regret." "Then there is only one thing that can save you. The crime committed by you is the highest of them all, but everyone deserves a chance, and you shall get one too." In a pool of light, a needy creature arrives. Feed him your bread, You shall be restored to your full might." The next thing she knew, she had been in this rotting place with chains wrapped around her body, and here she was, after 3 centuries, a little less bound, but bound nevertheless. 3 centuries she had waited for her needy creature wanting the moldy bread. But her savior had yet to come. She had had no sign that her prayer was answered during her 8 years, and she had only her numbers and words for company, for she knew how much words mattered. Swords can cut and kill, but words will stab and stay, burying themselves deep in our bones to make sure we never forget. It was mere words that took her strength away. It was words that brought it back. No gun, no sword, no army or king will ever be more powerful than a sentence. The words of the woman in the town square were what brought her here. The words of the people she had betrayed her own family for. Their support was what encouraged her to keep fighting. She stared into the darkness, occasionally squinting for a pool of light, but it never came. There was a strange kind of freedom in the dark that brought out the inner demon in her. The red sparks at her fingertips had died centuries ago, aligning with her will to live. But it was the feeling of the cold metal on her wrists, the clanging of the brackets around her ankles, which made her wake up every day. But most of all, it was hope. Hope that the mysterious stranger will come to save the damsel in distress. Or maybe he would come, look at the monster that darkness had brought out from inside the witch, and flee. God, I hope he does that after he takes the bread away. That thing smells, she muttered, her first words in a year. She took in a deep breath and looked at her surroundings once again. She was trapped under a shelf of rock, where the words stared back at her. A few feet to her left was a stone table of sorts, which had the bread on it. Right in front of her, there were a couple of trees. She had no idea how they survived without sunlight or water, but they were there to keep her alive. No, not alive, just to make sure she didn't fade away. You see, she was a witch. Witches don't die, as long as they have a purpose in life. As soon as they don't have one, they gradually fade into nothingness. Her train of thought was, however, soon interrupted. The trees swayed in the wind, and a flash of lightning lit up the entire forest. Suddenly, in a pool of light, a strange creature with silver wings emerged.
"Please, help me."
The witch lifted her head as she recounted the words of the prophecy in her mind. "A pool of light. What do you need?" she managed to croak out. "Who are you?" the creature asked, still bent over. "Are you a needy creature?" "Something to eat. Oh Lord, just something to eat in the name of the angels," he cried. Yes, would moldy bread suffice?" she asked, indicating towards the stone table. "Right now I would eat anything, but I cannot reach it. Can you move?" He points to the ground. He tried to stand up, stumbled, and fell face first on the ground. "You know what? Forget it. We don't want you dying." "Then I would have to wait another 3 centuries before another one of you arrives." She huffed. She pulled at her chains with all her might, even tried calling for some of her magic, but the iron in her chains had dulled her magic to almost nothing. She pulled and pulled and pulled, and then finally, another 10 brackets came free. She gave a victorious cry and reached toward the bread. She gingerly picked it up and went to the creature. She gave it to his hands and said the ceremonial words, "I give thee this grain to pledge myself free from these chains. I give thee this grain to give another token to humanity." She motioned for him to eat it. "Thank you, witch. This is an act of selflessness not expected from your kind. He began, but she cut him off. "Yes, we get it, you are very grateful, but eat." As soon as the bread touched his lips, she felt, more than saw, the vibration through the cursed chains as red lightning returned to her hands. Centuries of magic stored in those chains was too much for them, and they exploded. She looked at her hands, then at her feet, which were free again. She felt her sore knees, which were bruised from kneeling down for so long. The witch slowly got to her feet, with a grace only an immortal could achieve, and lifted her hands to her sides. She rose to her full might, raised her head, and made her magic dance on her fingertips. "My name is Aloysia, and I will never bow again." The wait was finally over. The world would get what it deserved. Except for them, it was a fine summer morning, perfect to be outdoors. Two sisters had been out mushroom picking and were on their home with heavy baskets full of mushrooms. They sang songs on the way and played with each other. Soon they reached a point where they had to cross a railway track. They did not think twice about crossing it, since there was no train coming, and they could not hear any whistle. They slowly climbed the embankment to cross the track, taking care not to drop the baskets. They were very near the track, and the little sister was about to cross it, when they heard the distinct horn of a train. The older sister got frightened and ran back. She thought that the young one was following her. She turned back and was shocked to see her little sister still crossing the track. "Come back here, run back fast," she screamed. It seemed that the little girl could not hear her sister. She was still concentrating on stepping over the track with her little feet and holding on to the basket. Then she tripped and fell on the track, scattering her mushrooms around. She sat down and began picking them up and putting in her basket. In the meanwhile, the elder sister had become hysteric. She cried and screamed, calling her little sister to leave the mushrooms and run back. But it seemed as though the little one could not hear her. The engine driver panicked on seeing the girl and blew his whistle with all his might, but she appeared not to hear the whistle. Her sister was now crying loudly, overcome by panic, as the little sister crawled between the tracks on her hands and knees to pick the rest of the mushrooms. The engine driver was helpless, as it was not possible for him to stop the engine suddenly. He blew the whistle as hard as he could, but the engine rolled over the little girl. The older sister clasped her face with her trembling hands and cried bitterly. The passengers too panicked at the thought of the sight they would have to witness. The guard ran down to the end of the train to see what happened to the little girl. When the train passed, everybody saw her lying very still between the tracks with her face down. Then she raised her head, sprang to her knees, and began gathering the remaining mushrooms. The big sister ran towards her, tears streaming down her face. They hugged and kissed each other, crying out of happiness, tears of joy flowing down their little cheeks. Never were two souls so happily united as at that moment. She promised her little sister that thereafter she would hold her hand tightly while crossing the railway line. The two sisters then picked all the remaining mushrooms and, hand in hand, solemnly walked back home. They were indeed two souls who had become wiser than their years in the span of a few minutes.